I'm Ming, and growing up as a Vietnamese student is not an uncommon sight for me to see my peers get sent to English language institutions. English has received a very special position of honor in Vietnamese classrooms, and indeed it gives us access to global academic resources. It grants us, it enhances our cognitive attitude, and it grants us a competitive edge in the global job market. And yet, would you believe me if I say that underneath the surface, the excessive push for the English language has produced its own detrimental effects? Young Vietnamese students, bombarded with English vocabulary from their constant exposure to social media, struggle to articulate in their native tongue. I have friends who can speak English real well, on par with natives, and yet they struggle to remember even the most basic native words, even opting to use English alternatives on all occasions. Moreover, in Vietnam, where English speakers are highly valued, the focus has shifted from acquiring a language into studying to pass certain examinations and tests that would boost their chances of getting into institutions, universities, or companies. This harms actual language acquisitions because when the metric becomes the goal, every meaning is lost. And these tests or examinations are in no way cheap. You will need $60 for the SAT and $200 for the IELTS, while the average monthly income of a person in Vietnam is only $277. This exacerbates the inequality gap in Vietnam. Affluent families can afford English tutors and classes easily, while underprivileged families can hardly stay afloat if their sons ever try to apply for IELTS on the same month. And preparation for these tests and examinations take a long time. You would need 2 to 3 months in order to get from band 3 to band 5 on the IELTS. And when considering the majority of IELTS test takers in Vietnam are students in the last years of compulsory education, this means that the pursuit of these linguistic certificates not only require significant financial investment, but also detract away from the limited available time that could be used for studying for the national examinations. Is this really in the nation's best interest? $420 million of taxpayers' money gone for the sake of the National English Language Program. And yet, in 2018, it managed to produce a national average English score of only 3.91 on the entrance exam, a record low. We often talk about the importance of English to globalization, and yet our children are forgetting even our ancestral roots. I once had the chance to visit our country's most antique university, the famed Quốc Tử Giám, whose halls were adorned with books showing the past stage's dedication to learning. And in the same space were two boys around my age. And I heard them clearly pronounce the old characters loudly in a Japanese pronunciation. The characters in question were Tiên Sinh, and they pronounced it sensei in the Japanese language. They were obviously educated enough to understand the meanings of the characters, and yet they were completely oblivious to its obvious connection to Vietnamese heritage. We have been chasing proficiency in other tongues with great zeal, and yet the own wellspring of our language, our culture, are being tragically neglected. There was this research paper by a Vietnamese professor in which he discussed a phenomenon called negative globalization. It is when certain countries have to change and conform to global standards, creating an imbalance in power. He talked about how non-English speaking countries have to expend money and resources in order to import the English language to its people and promote it. Thereby, while countries from the Anglosphere can sell English education services, making profits and turning those non-English speaking countries into a market for exploitation. Is this not the same thing that is happening in Vietnam? Not just Vietnam, but other Southeast Asian countries. Of course, it's for our own good. We transitioned from a war-torn country to a rapidly modernizing nation in the span of 50 years, and English played a crucial role in that process. And yet, to what extent are we willing to push this further? Our students are tired, lamenting the hours of studies. Our parents exhausted, working day to night in order to fund their children's education. English is undoubtedly one of the most important sources of opportunities for us. I myself grew up in the system, and it is one of the reasons that I managed to be able to stand here today in order to share this to you all. And yet, in our world, where every 2 weeks a language disappears from the face of the earth, we must pay great attention to the potential ramifications of deifying the English language and be aware of the protection of our own cultural heritage. Take, for example, the Filipinos, whose history was entwined deeply with imperialism. Despite gaining independence since 1946, English still remained dominant in all fields of life: bureaucracy, education, and even daily life. In schools, English reigned supreme, even overshadowing the Tagalog, the native language of the Filipinos. And this has presented the Philippines with a very interesting question of navigating colonial influences while protecting their own culture and language. So, how do we avoid the same fate? Well, first, we can start by revamping the National Language Forum program. We can start by moving away from traditional classrooms into more active and input-based learning. The government can provide subsidies and scholarships to those families in need in order to relieve the burden of English education. We can even create a new metric of testing that would not only be government-controlled but also low cost. And the final step in this, I believe, and the most important one, is through the correct perception of language education. Because only by understanding that English is a tool for communication and not for self-glorification can we begin to appreciate other cultures while not forgetting our own. Language isn't just a collection of words or syntax. It's the very fabric of our cultural identity. And therefore, I believe that wherever we may come from, it's important to appreciate our native tongue and our culture, and therefore we may not lose ourselves in the future. Thank you.